So hello and welcome. This webinar is called Introduction to nCode GlyphWorks SuperGlyphs. My name is Joe Spadola. I am an applications engineer for HPM nCode based on the West Coast. Today we're going to be talking about one of the more advanced features in GlyphWorks called the SuperGlyph. And we'll see how we can use them to do a number of useful things within a GlyphWorks analysis. So this is our agenda for the next 30 minutes or so that we have together. I will start by giving a brief background on nCode GlyphWorks, which I assume that this audience is relatively familiar with, or at the very least has a decent working knowledge of. Then I will introduce you to a function inside GlyphWorks called the SuperGlyph, which is what allows us to consolidate multiple glyphs together to help remove workspace clutter. And it also provides the foundation for performing repetitive calculations in GlyphWorks. Specifically, today I'm going to talk about how to do this by first looping on glyph properties, and then by looping on multi-column time series features. I will finish off each section with a short live demo so that you can see it in action. And just to reiterate, SuperGlyphs are definitely an advanced feature of GlyphWorks. This presentation does not provide a rigorous background or introduction to the software. So if you've never heard of GlyphWorks, or if you have very limited experience using it, I highly encourage you to visit our website and check out some of the more introductory webinars that we have readily available for you. Okay, so that said, I do feel it is appropriate to give a very quick background on the software. As I said, I am assuming that most of you already know what I'm about to tell you, but I just want to take a second to formally introduce it to you again. GlyphWorks is one of 3 software products developed by nCode, and it serves as a data processing system designed for analyzing measured test data. nCode has 2 other products. One is called DesignLife, which serves as a fatigue analysis tool in the virtual domain, and it effectively turns whole model stress plots into life plots. Okay, our third product is called Automation, and it serves as a database for storing and managing large amounts of test data. The unique feature about Automation, however, is that GlyphWorks lives underneath it, and it can automatically process data as it's uploaded to the automation server. Since our focus today is GlyphWorks, I'll be spending another second just diving a little bit deeper into some of its capabilities. So as I've said already, GlyphWorks is a data processing system designed to analyze measured test data. It has a very powerful and easy to use graphical interface with drag and drop capabilities. We can deal with data in both the time and frequency domain. Processes are easily scalable and can handle, without problem, large channel counts. We're talking hundreds to thousands of channels, no problem, and also very large numbers of tests. It also has something called one-click reporting, which allows you to very efficiently and, more importantly, automatically generate a report of customizable results. GlyphWorks has a wide range of built-in DSP tools such as filtering and mathematics and stats and signal editing and anomaly detection. It has a vast array of built-in fatigue analysis capabilities as well, such as stress life, strain life, and crack growth. We can perform fatigue-sensitive time series editing to help accelerate lab tests or rig tests. We can perform fatigue of an entire proving ground schedule or of complete flight spectra for aerospace. We can look at fatigue in the frequency domain and create accelerated vibration shaker profiles as well. And we also have a variety of tools for noise and vibration analysis as well. And this, again, is only a relatively small subset of all of the GlyphWorks capabilities. We have over 100 plus built-in glyphs that are highly configurable and ready for use inside GlyphWorks. Okay, so let's shift focus to the SuperGlyph. As I mentioned, the SuperGlyph is one of the more advanced features in GlyphWorks. that said, it's important to note that by and large, it is not needed for most of the required analysis that a user would typically do inside GlyphWorks. However, there are times where it can be very useful and very powerful. In general, the SuperGlyph is used for two main reasons. First, it provides a convenient way to declutter your analysis workspace. That is to say that you can wrap up a collection of interconnected glyphs into one single, what's called a SuperGlyph, with a much smaller analysis workspace footprint and a cleaner data pipe structure. Secondly, the SuperGlyph provides you the ability to perform repetitive calculations inside GlyphWorks. And there are a number of ways to do this, but in essence, you can kind of think of it as an implementation of a for or a while loop as found in all programming languages, where you perform a calculation, increment the variable, perform the calculation again, increment the variable, perform the calculation, et cetera, et cetera. So what you end up with at the end then is a table of results as a function of the variable you changed. And again, we'll see exactly how that works a little bit later, but it turns out, needless to say, to be a pretty powerful tool. It's like adding programming level capabilities without the hassle of learning a programming language or dealing with all the nasty syntax errors that inevitably come with it. So for starters, let's talk about the simple wrapping feature offered by the SuperGlyph. Let's say you have a process that looks something like this here. You have input data, you have a series of glyphs that do some sort of data conditioning or data cleaning or analysis or what have you, and then you have some result. If you're the type of person who prefers to have a very neat and tidy office desk, you're probably also the type of person who would appreciate a clean and minimal GlyphWorks analysis workspace. So to consolidate these glyphs in a SuperGlyph, you simply highlight them like so. And then you take a look up at the toolbar and click the gear and black box icon that says, if you hover your mouse over it for a second, it will say replace selection with SuperGlyph. Okay? Doing so wraps all of the highlighted glyphs into a SuperGlyph like so. So your workspace goes from what we started with there at about 11 glyphs down to 3 glyphs, and it produces the exact same results. Okay. You can still access all the original glyphs by opening up that SuperGlyph by maximizing it like so. So if we click on the button in the top right portion of the SuperGlyph, it will open it up, and you can go in here and edit all of the properties of the individual glyphs just as you would expect. You can also add additional glyphs or remove glyphs, modify the pipe connections, etc., as you need. Alternatively, you can access all the individual glyph properties as well directly from the properties of the SuperGlyph itself. So as you can see here, a nice tabbed properties page shows up and is displayed so that you can easily access the full properties of each individual glyph. Okay, so I am going to jump into the software real quick and show you a demo of the wrapping function like I just talked about in the presentation. Okay, so again, I'm not going to give a rigorous background on nCode. I'm assuming that most of you are familiar enough with it at this point, so I'm just going to go show how the SuperGlyph actually works. So I'm going to launch GlyphWorks. At this point, I'm going to open a flow. This flow happens to be exactly what I showed you just a moment ago. So here I've got some input data. I'm going to drag my test to my input glyph. I can look at that data. It's raw data right after acquisition. I have a whole series of glyphs here. I can simply run the flow. It goes through the process, and then I see my results pop up down at the bottom here. So to create this SuperGlyph, like I said, all we do is highlight all the glyphs that I want to wrap up, and then look for the gear and box icon at the top there. Clicking on that wraps them all up into the SuperGlyph here. Okay? And like I said, you can either access the properties by right-clicking and seeing all the individual properties down here in one page, or you can open up and actually see all of the glyphs as they were before you wrap them up. From here, you can go in and edit the properties as well. If you wanted to edit your time series calculator, you could do so here. If you wanted to add a glyph, you can do that. So let's say I wanted to add a filter right before the test splitter that is selecting forces. I can go grab any filter and grab a Butterworth filter, disconnect this pipe here, and then just insert it like so. Okay, and then I can exit my SuperGlyph, can run my flow again, and it works as it did, but now with the glyph that I just inserted. Okay. Similarly, you can go in and remove glyphs. Okay, no surprise there. One other thing that you can do here, which is quite useful, is actually save this SuperGlyph to your glyph palette. So if I right-click on my SuperGlyph, I can go Save As. It'll ask me what page and what palette I want to save it on, and what name you want to give it. So here I'm going to say this is my data cleaning flow, or data cleaning glyph, rather. Okay, so I hit OK, and then it pops it into my SuperGlyph palette, just like I said. Okay, so now if you're, let's say we end this flow or get rid of this flow, at some other time if I have new data, okay, I can pretend like I have new data there. I can go back to my SuperGlyph palette. I can drag that glyph right back onto my workspace, connect it up, and then view the results. And it works just like it did. Okay, all the glyphs are in there, working just the way that they did. Okay, so this is a very useful way to create a set glyph that does a specific series of calculations. Okay. Furthermore, if you are in a methods group or something and you distribute these to the other users, you can lock the contents down if you wanted to, put a password on it, set the glyph permissions, property permissions, etc. You can also, if you want to, if you decide I actually like having glyphs all over my workspace, I don't really want this this SuperGlyph here anymore, you have the ability to unwrap the glyph as well. To do that, you simply just highlight the glyph and then click on this button here that shows an arrow pointing out of a black box. Okay, and if you push that, you now have your all the internals of that SuperGlyph again here on your workspace. Okay. So I'm back in the presentation here again. So let's see how we can extend this concept of wrapping a series of glyphs together to help us take it a step further. Specifically, I want to show how we can leverage this SuperGlyph to perform repetitive calculations in GlyphWorks. Okay, you create what's called a looping SuperGlyph in the same way that you create a standard SuperGlyph, except in this case, you're going to be looking for a slightly different logo on the workspace, sorry, in the toolbar. So if you mouse over this one for a second, you will see the text replace selection with looping superglyph. Functionally, it works in the same manner that a for loop or a while loop in programming languages work. But again, like I said earlier, the beauty here is that you don't need to know a programming language or deal with any of the accompanying syntax and compilation errors that you're sure to run into when learning a programming language. Okay, so this enables an extremely powerful capability that could otherwise only be accomplished with actual programming. Okay, so to introduce the looping superglyph, I'm going to start by considering a traditional strain life calculation, like you see here. A basic strain life calculation with a single kf value is quite simple, and it looks like this. And it works great for performing a single calculation if I know my kf. But what happens if I don't know my kf, or if I want to do a study to see how my results might vary as a function of kf? Well, one way you could go about it is to open the properties of the strain life glyph, change the kf, run the process again, keep track of the results, open up the glyph again, change kf, track the changes, etc., etc. It gets quite boring and quite monotonous quite quickly. So the proper way to do this is to wrap up the contents of the EN and the tabulated results into a looping superglyph. Okay, and doing so would leave you with something that looks like this. Once you loop it, or once you wrap it up into a looping superglyph, from the surface, it looks pretty much the same as the standard superglyph. However, when you open the looping superglyph in the same way that we did earlier, we click on the button in the top right, you see slightly different contents than we did previously. This time, we'll now see this new glyph pop up called the loop controller. Okay, here you see it titled SG Loop Control 1. Unsurprisingly, if you access the properties of the loop controller, you can configure how the loop runs. Notice that there are 5 different methods of looping available to you. Today, I'm going to focus only on the property value looping method and the multi-column looping method. I will leave as an exercise to the audience to explore the other 3 looping methods. Okay, so after you choose the proper method, here I've decided to choose the property value. I simply click the configure button and select which property from which glyph I would like to vary. Okay. Here I've chosen the kf value from the strain life glyph. And I want to see what happens as I vary kf. Okay. So when I click OK, it brings up this configure variable option. Here I want to vary kf from 1 to 2 in steps or increments of 0.1. So after entering that information, I'm pressing OK. You're good to go. So at this point, you can exit the superglyph and run the process. Okay, so as the user, you have the ability to view the results in many different ways. Once you have the raw data, you can pretty much create any sort of plot that might be helpful for you to visualize your data. On the left here, you can see the results I chose to keep track of as I varied kf. The plot in the top right shows damage as a function of kf. Okay, that's just a plot that I happen to choose to look at. Or, if you wanted to look at something else, down in the bottom right, you can see a plot of kf as a function of max stress. And I put a reference line on there of UTS, so you can see how max stress tracks against UTS as you change your kf. Okay, so this sort of analysis is typically done in what-if scenarios or when I'm trying to get an understanding of how certain variables affect my results. Okay. So now I'm going to jump back to the software real quick and give a quick demo of that process. So I'm going to go to different folder, and this time I'm going to build it completely from scratch. So here I have some strain gauge data, okay, and I want to perform my strain life analysis. So I'm going to go to my fatigue palette. I'm going to grab my strain life glyph, connect it to my input data. And for the sake of this example, I'm just going to look at the metadata results that come out of this glyph. I'm not going to look at the histograms or any of the other associated results here. I just want to know a couple very basic pieces of information about my strain life glyph. Okay, so in order to do the fatigue analysis, the only other property I have to set in here is the material. So I'm just going to go grab a material that I know works well here. And at this point, you're ready to run your flow. So if I hit run, I can see in my metadata here, I'm going to actually just choose to view some specific results here. So I'm going to click on table and choose to look at, let's see, I want to look at, well, first I want to look at KF because that's what I'm eventually going to want to vary. So I'm going to look at KF, and then in the results, I want to look at total damage as well as life. Okay. Sorry, I think I forgot to add one to it. I also wanted to look at life and repeats. There we go. Okay, so now I have these three properties here that I'm looking at: KF, total damage, and life. So, like I said, as it stands, this is great if you know your KF and you just want a single result. But the point of the looping superglyph is to actually study how things change over time. So here I want to vary KF, like I said earlier. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to need to create, as I'm looping, I'm going to need to create a tabulated list of all the results. And I'm going to use this metadata display to do that for me. In order to set it up to do that, I have to make a couple changes. So I'm going to go to the properties of my metadata display, and I'm going to go to the Advanced tab, and I'm going to say I want to change this collate test option to true. What this does is keep track in the metadata display of every result that is fed to it. So this metadata display will eventually be wrapped up in the loop. So every time the loop runs, I want to collate those tests. I want to keep track of all the results as they're spit out of the strain life glyph. Okay. The second thing I want to do is change export type to output type. What this allows me to do is because this metadata display, again, is going to be buried in a looping glyph, I'm going to need to access those results, that table of results that gets built up in the loop. I'm going to need to access them out of the loop. So this export to output type allows me to do that. Okay, so when I hit OK, I can see now that I will have a multi-column output here. So it's going to export this table that gets built up in this metadata display to my data values display here. Okay, so now all I have to do is select the table and the calculation that I want to loop. I'm going to click on this Replace with Looping SuperGlyph option, and there we go. So now I need to go configure how that loop runs. So I'm going to go into my SuperGlyph, and here's the loop controller. Okay, so I'm going to access the properties of the loop controller. I'm going to change the loop method to property value. I will click on the configure button, and then I want to add a variable. Okay, this will bring up all the glyphs that are in your superglyph there and ask you which one you want to vary. Okay, I know that I want to vary my KF from my strain life glyph, so I select it like so, and I push OK. Then it brings up this configure variable window here. I said I wanted to vary from 1 to 2 in steps of 0.1. Okay, I hit OK. And now I can see my loop controller, if I expand this a little bit, is now indicating that it will do exactly what I just told it. So at this point, I can exit my SuperGlyph, and I can run the flow. And you can see it hangs up in the SuperGlyph for just a moment while it does those repetitive calculations. Okay, when it's done, the output here is the consolidated or the collated table that I generated earlier, and the result is fed into a data values display. So now I can see, here's my independent variable, this KF, the value that I was varying over time. And here are the associated results that I chose to keep track of. Like I said, I kept track of total damage as well as life. Okay. From here, if you wanted to, you could create all those plots that I showed you earlier. You can do that simply by just connecting a data values display, sorry, an XY display up to that glyph there, and now you can see here's damage as a function of KF. Okay, so you can make the output as simple as you want, just raw text results, or you can really make, you can go wild with it and create a bunch of plots and all sorts of things like that. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to the presentation. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about another looping option or another looping method called the MultiColumn Looping method. And this is what allows us to loop on multi-column time series features. And again, I'm going to introduce the topic by first looking at a non-looping flow. This screen capture here shows some raw acceleration data. I'm calculating a 5-second running RMS of the acceleration of a seat. And let's assume that I'm only concerned with exceedances of 0.13 Gs, as I'm considering this this condition a fair indicator of being on a rough road. So I can easily use the time series calculator to highlight those sections for me, which is exactly what I've done here. However, the graphical editor by itself can only extract those sections. When I extract those sections, it concatenates them all together for me. So in some instances, that's fine. But if I want to perform individual statistical calculations on each individual section of rough road, I'm going to need to create a looping superglyph. So the GlyphWorks experts in the audience might already know this, but you can actually hook up a data values display to the feature list output of the time series calculator. As it so happens, GlyphWorks stores these features, these feature lists, in a multi-column data type. And we'll see why that's important in just a second. Okay, so if we look here at the data values display, we will see details about all the highlighted sections, such as start time and end time of each section. Okay, and it turns out that we can use this multi-column feature list to drive the looping superglyph. We create the looping superglyph in the exact same manner as the previous example. Okay, so nothing new here so far, except that we now have 2 input paths on the superglyph because we're passing it the time series data as well as that multi-column feature list. Okay. Now, this is where this example deviates from the previous one. If we're going to be using that multi-column feature list to drive the loop controller, we need to actually pass that list to it. So we actually modify the structure of the SuperGlyph internals as shown here. If you remember in the previous example, the loop controller was completely disconnected from the SuperGlyph. Here, we actually insert the loop controller in between the SuperGlyph input and the SuperGlyph subroutine. This allows the loop controller to see all of the items that are in the multi-column feature list. Okay? And all the items that are in the multi-column feature list are all of the highlighted sections from the time series data. Okay? Then, just as before, we edit the properties of the loop controller, but this time we choose the multi-column option. Okay? This makes the loop run for however many highlighted sections there are in the original time series data. So once we accept the changes, exit the SuperGlyph, and run the flow, we can view the results. In this example, you'll see a table that looks something like this. Each highlighted section now has individual statistics calculated for it. Okay, so this first column here, I call road section, is really just another way of saying each time series feature or each highlighted section of data. Okay, so you can see there's the first highlighted section. I have a series of stats calculated for each channel in that particular highlighted section. Okay, so there's the first one, there's the second one, and you can see that this table is actually quite large. It's going to be actually the number of channels times however many highlighted sections there are. There will be that many columns in this table. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into the software one final time and show you what building this process actually looks like. Okay, so I'm going to so I'm going to start with this standard flow right here. This is the flow that simply takes my data, calculates running RMS, and then highlights those 0.13 exceedances. Right, so this is exactly what we saw in the presentation a moment ago. I just want to take this and build the loop around it so that you can see what that actually looks like. So, first thing I'm going to do is attach a metadata display to my graphical editor. Okay, and just like before, I'm going to want to go into properties. I'm going to want to enter collate mode because again, we're going to be doing this table here is going to be in a loop, so we want to keep track of the results from every iteration of that loop. And then I also want to, again, export the data or the table after it's done collating into an output pipe. And then I want to have a custom display there. Okay, and again, I want to add a data values display to this so that I can see my table. And at this point, I can run the flow. This is just to purge all the data or to get all the data moving through all the glyphs. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to select the results table and the graphical editor, and I'm going to put them in a loop. Okay, so there's my loop. I can see the original time series data as well as the feature list. The multi-column feature list is now being fed into this SuperGlyph here. So I'm going to go into the SuperGlyph. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And now I can see here's my loop controller. Okay, and remember, I'm sending a multi-column feature list to the SuperGlyph, and I want to use that to drive my loop controller. So what I need to do is actually insert the loop controller in between where that feature list is coming in to the superglyph and when it's going into the subroutine. So that's all I have to do. I then edit the properties of my loop controller and say I want to use the MultiColumn Looping method, right? Because that time series feature list is saved in MultiColumn data type. Okay, so then I can go into my subroutine here and can actually run the flow at this point. What I want to show you is, let me run it first. The graphical editor is going to update, and you can see the highlighted sections are stepping through that graphical editor. So you can actually see each highlighted section in there. Okay, this isn't necessary to sit here and watch for your flow, but I just wanted to show you exactly what that looks like. So you can see that it is in fact going to be stepping through each highlighted section that I found in the original flow there. Okay, so from here, all I want to do is configure my metadata display. I'm going to do that by choosing which values I want to keep track of. The first thing I want to do under test metadata, because this is in a looping superglyph, we're actually going to see a new piece of data, actually called loop data. And current loop, I'm going to add that to my list of viewed items. Current loop is just an indication of which highlighted section you are currently looking at. So in reality, I know each highlighted section is just a different road section. So I can go and just actually edit the title of that to read road section instead of loop, current loop. Okay. As far as results, I want to look at the channel number. I want to look at the, channel title. I want to look at the units associated with that channel, as well as some statistical things like max, min, mean. I want to look at RMS, max, min, mean, RMS, and standard deviation. Okay, so I can hit OK. If I look at this list right here, you can see, did I not add max, min, and mean? I forgot to add max, min, and mean, I'm sorry. Let me actually max, min. There we go. As well as RMS and standard deviation. There we go. Okay, so now we have a full listing of all those variables there. So now I can exit my superglyph, sorry. And at this point, I can just run the flow. I know it's going to step through every single highlighted section. I know it's going to create that tabulated list of results. And when it's done, it's going to export it via the output pipe to the outside of my superglyph, which is what we see right here. So I can maximize this, and now I can see the exact same table that I showed you in the presentation. So you can see road section, the first road section contains all 8 channels, and that particular highlighted section now has a max value associated with it, a mean value associated with it, min value, RMS, and standard deviation. Okay, you can customize this as much as you want. You can create any sort of statistic that you want to calculate or keep track of in that loop, and then have it fed to the outside, just like you saw here. And if we scroll all the way down in this list, if you look in the first column there, you can actually see we have, in fact, calculated these statistics for all 17 highlighted sections that we originally found. So 17 different rough road sections we have these statistics calculated for. Okay. So I'm going to jump back to the presentation real quick and finish up here. So every GlyphWorks installation comes with a rather hefty list of extremely helpful documents. The particular one that I think would be most relevant to this audience is called the GlyphWorks Worked Examples. You can access it from the Manuals toolbar in the main menu. In it, you will find 25 step-by-step worked examples. You will even find the exact 3 demos that I just did today. And I highly encourage you to work through each of them if you think that SuperGlyphs might be useful to you. Regardless, if you haven't explored the worked examples already, you will likely find tons of other useful information in there as well. So again, I highly encourage you to check it out. Okay, so to sum things up, SuperGlyphs are definitely an advanced feature of GlyphWorks. It's not necessary to understand them in order to use GlyphWorks, okay? But it can be a very powerful tool for you to perform an in-depth analysis with, or any sort of trade study that you might find useful. You can use it to create tidier workspaces. You can use it to combine a series of glyphs into one glyph. That, like I showed, you can save that to your palette. You can pass that around to colleagues. You can lock it down, modify the permissions, etc. Okay? And it also allows you to perform repetitive calculations. And again, if you've found this interesting and haven't used them before, I highly recommend you check out the worked examples on SuperGlyphs. They're a great starting point in understanding and using SuperGlyphs. Okay, so